the Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. We're with John Rubino talking about China dumping dollars and treasury paper to get out of the mess they're in. And we got a lot more to talk about. But John, like, China's dumping dollars and so is Japan. This isn't so much that they're just doing it to upset the dollar apple cart. This is like they're all broke, right?
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, a fair bit has happened in the last couple of weeks, and the whole China and Japan dumping dollars thing is an interesting one because their currencies are tanking because they have inflation that they brought about by massive money creation, et cetera, and so they're running through their foreign exchange reserves to try to prop their currencies up because the further their currencies fall, the worse inflation is. And it becomes this kind of death spiral if you just let it go. So they're trying to stop it, both countries, and they're doing it in basically the same way. They're selling their treasury paper, U.S. treasury paper, which is to say they're dumping dollars in order to prop up their own currencies. And there is a limit to how long a strategy like that can last too, because eventually you run out of dollars. And that's definitely happened in the case of China. They have run through $1 trillion or so dollars worth of U.S. treasury paper in the last couple of years, and there's not that much more left. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when they get down close to zero, which, by the way, is a process that's happening in a lot of different fields right now. There's a lot of trend lines that are heading towards zero-ish. And nobody knows what's going to happen when they hit. But China is an interesting one because they've got a gigantic real estate bust. Their household real estate sector is one of the biggest sectors, economic sectors in the global economy, and it's imploding. So we will see, but keep an eye on China because it's liable to be a big story, whereas it's not now because there's a lot of other things that are grabbing the headlines. But it could be that China, next time we talk, is up there among the one or two really serious, scary stories in the world.
And Japan has been a scary story for decades now, and they keep heading down the same path, and they don't seem to have any regard for the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, they've been on autopilot since the 1990s when they had a gigantic real estate bubble burst. And instead of just taking the pain, letting a lot of entities go bankrupt and then starting over, they propped everybody up. And they've been doing that ever since. So on a per capita basis, they have more government debt than any other society in human history. And the yen has held up really well throughout most of that time. So they were able to get away with it and have basically zero interest rates. So their debt didn't cost them anything. Now the yen is falling, their interest rates are rising, and all of a sudden they're in a kind of a death spiral as a society. And as I said, they're trying to prop it up by selling dollars to buy yen. But they can only do that while they have tons of dollars. And when they run out of dollars, then there's no real solution for them other than a currency collapse, spiking inflation, and some kind of societal dissolution. We're not that far from that. So that's probably, in Japan's case, a 2023 story, but that's not that far away now.
Well, I was at Martin Armstrong's World Economic Conference last week. I was able to stay there for a day, and he addressed this issue. The problem is, excuse me, that all these countries borrowed in dollars because they thought it was going to be cheaper. The rates were lower, and they expected the dollar to go down. And it's the reverse put, is effectively they were doing a put on the dollar. And you know what happens when you're holding a naked put and that thing reverses course? It's like selling a put on Tesla and then watching it go to 1,000, right?
Yes, indeed. But we're in a situation now where no matter how bad things get in the U.S. or how bad things get in the world because of actions of the U.S., the dollar goes up because the U.S. always seems like the least risky situation, even when we're a mess and we're causing trouble in the world, because that trouble that we're causing makes things even worse for other people. If you're a multimillionaire in China right now, you want to get some money out of the country because China is becoming an ever increasingly authoritarian dictatorship. If you're in Russia, obviously you want to get some money out because Russia is increasingly isolated, and they're being drained pretty dramatically by the whole Ukraine thing. If you're in Europe, you want to get some money out of your country because Europe, the euro is a currency that is on the verge of fracturing. And where do you go? You go to the US, you buy a Miami condo, or you buy some San Francisco real estate, or you buy an oil well or some agricultural land or something like that. In the US, even though we've got double-digit inflation or near double-digit inflation, it's still better here than it is elsewhere. So the problem for a lot of these countries, like you said, who borrowed in dollars, thinking that their currency would go up versus the dollar because we're such a mess, are finding the opposite is true, that the dollar is going up versus their currency. Although, that might be a 2 weeks ago story. The dollar has been falling lately, even relative to other currencies. So we don't know how long that'll last, but that provides a little relief for some of these guys. But it's got to fall a long way before the borrowers of dollars out there in the world are out of the woods. We need to see the dollar index go down to, say, the 80s before it's not a problem for a lot of other countries. And I don't see that happening in the short run, just because it's true. When there's trouble here, the trouble is worse in the rest of the world.
And the war has got to end, right? The war has got to end for that to happen. There's no end in sight. The other thing, John, when you look at that Dixie index, it has been so volatile. It could go up 1.5, 150 basis points. Today, it's up 85 basis points. We would never see exchange rates that volatile in the absence of a major crisis, which obviously we're having now. I don't mean to downplay that, but in the past, dollar volatility, 100 basis point moves only happened when something crazy was going on.
Well, yeah, right now we've got multiple crazy things going on. So we should expect extreme volatility making its way from the financial markets into the currency markets. In other words, it used to be stocks and bonds would bounce around a lot, but currencies would be relatively stable. They would move more slowly than the financial assets that individuals own and institutions trade. And that's not the case anymore. Now the focus is shifting to currencies in a lot of cases because we've screwed up our finances to the point where it's perceived that there's no choice for any major government to bail out everybody in sight around the world, and we're just waiting for that to happen. They're all trying to tighten right now, and very few people think that the tightening goes on indefinitely. They think that at some point central banks will tighten to the point that they break some big part of the market, and then they have to go back to easing, which puts pressure on the currencies. In other words, when all the central banks are easing again, that makes the currencies even weaker. And there's a lot of trading going on in anticipation of that central bank capitulation. And we don't know about the timing of it yet. It might be sooner, might be later, but there are bets being placed in the currency markets on that eventuality, and that's causing some extreme volatility in currencies, and it's only going to get worse. There's no scenario out there in which the currency markets become placid again because we haven't fixed anything. We're talking about, we'll tighten a little bit and that'll wring a little bit of the inflation out of the market. Well, okay, but that doesn't stop the US from running trillion-dollar deficits for as far as the eye can see. That doesn't stop Japan from doing what they're doing or China from doing what they're doing. Yeah, everybody's going to continue to borrow insane amounts of money. And that puts ever increasing pressure on the world's currencies. So we haven't seen anything like what we're going to see. The big currency crisis has yet to happen yet, even though to Europeans and Japanese and to an extent Chinese, it feels like a currency crisis is here already, but nothing like what's coming. And when it comes, it'll be a prelude to the great monetary reset that's going to happen. So this whole thing still has to play out. It doesn't seem like it, but we're still in the early innings of a game that is liable to go into extra innings before all is said and done.
Hey, and it's going to end with a huge bang, not a whimper. Speaking of huge bangs and not whimpers, cryptos. It turns out the crypto is just a blockchain method of financing the Democratic Party in the United States. That seems to be its primary purpose here. Or am I missing something?
Well, cryptos have had a brutal couple of weeks, and a big part of it is because a major exchange turned out to be basically a big Ponzi scheme. This exchange was just run by a bunch of kids living in a mansion in the Bahamas who had no corporate controls, no risk management structures in place. They were self-dealing, and they were taking customer money and they were putting it into a related hedge fund and speculating with it, and it all just blew up on them. And that has crushed the value of a lot of other cryptos, because nobody knows which crypto exchange was in bed with these guys and is going to blow up going forward. We can't know that, and it's liable to be quite a few of them, it sounds like. But as you mentioned, there's a twist here too, which is that the U.S. is just throwing billions and billions of dollars. We're probably up to like $100 billion now that we've given to Ukraine to fight the proxy war that we started in order to drain Russia's military capability, yada, yada. But anyhow, Ukraine was taking that money and it was investing it in this big crypto exchange. And then the guys running the crypto exchange were donating a big chunk of that money to Democrat politicians. So much so that the CEO of the crypto exchange was the second biggest donor to the Democrat Party behind George Soros, ahead of Michael Bloomberg, ahead of all of these other whales that give tons of money to the Democrats, except for George Soros. This guy was massive in Democrat funding circles. So now the question is, and so much of this was used to finance election campaigns in the just completed midterm elections. So, the question is, was that cheating? The government finances an entity like Ukraine, who then turns around and funnels money back into the Democrat Party right before an election. It sounds like corruption and cheating. And if so, at a minimum, should those Democrat politicians have to give that money back to taxpayers? And if you're talking about actual morality at work here, should we run that election over again in the cases where the Democrats had a big funding advantage because of this corruption? We'll see. I don't think anything's going to happen because the Democrats are still in charge of the Justice Department.
It's the Department of Justice. And look, hey, the answer, I could tell you exactly where the answer is to all of this. It's on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Okay.
Right? Everything, the Rosetta Stone of corrupt politics is Hunter Biden's laptop.
And that just became a more interesting story today, because for people who aren't familiar with it, Hunter Biden was a crackhead and basically a guy who was selling influence when his dad was the vice president. Okay, so we pretty much know that's the case now. And he left a laptop at a computer repair store and forgot about it. Now, that guy turned it over to the FBI, and for 2 years, the powers that be sat on the stuff that was in that laptop, which was very incriminating to Joe Biden. It's not just Hunter Biden's a private citizen, why do we care? He was chronicling the corruption of the U.S. government headed by Vice President Joe Biden. It's right there in the laptop.
Now president,
but, now president. But at the time, the vice president was basically selling influence via his family members. We know that now. Mm-hmm. And but the government sat on that for 2 years, through the presidential election of 2020 and through the midterm elections. And now CBS News just came out with a deep dive investigative report in which they concluded that the laptop is for real.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, wow, really?
I thought Hunter was a PC guy and it was an Apple, so I was convinced it wasn't Hunter's.
Yeah, and that has spawned thousands of Twitter memes now that are just hilarious. It's like breaking news: CNBC found some votes for Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge now wins the 2020 or the 1920 election. Stuff like that. It's pretty funny. And it should be incredibly embarrassing for these mainstream news outlets that Glenn Greenwald had the entire story in early 2020 and was basically fired by The Intercept because they didn't want to run with that story. And the New York Post had the story and was kicked off of all major media prior to that election because the major media did not want to, and this is Google, this is Facebook, this is Twitter. They basically banned, they canceled the account of the New York Post to keep the New York Post from being able to publicize this stuff. And so, the level of corruption involved here is just astounding.
And take it another step further, we find out that the government is basically dictating to the social media platforms and to big tech when they should delete postings, tweets, whatever it might be, videos. They've been telling them, right? We just heard that because it just got leaked, all these emails where they've got people on the staffs of Facebook, Twitter, Google, telling them, shadow ban this guy, get rid of him, get rid of her. It's very distressing because it's the biggest fear.
Kerry, it's more than distressing because according to the First Amendment of the Constitution, the government is not allowed to censor people. We have freedom of speech as the very first right in the Bill of Rights. And using a company to censor people, for the government to coerce and or cooperate with a company to censor people, is still the government censoring people. So it's blatantly unconstitutional. Yes. That's a major constitutional crisis that is not going to go anywhere because the mainstream media, the corporate media is not going to report it. Or if they do report it. Yeah.
Because these companies all say, oh, we're a private company. We're Alphabet, we're a private company. You can't tell us what to put up on our site. However, when they're doing the government's work, doing the devil's deeds here, and they're actually have government employees on their staff or intelligence people that they run things through, they give them portals to monitor all the data coming and going, and then receive their marching orders from the government, guess what? It's no longer a private business. They're actually acting under the color of government authority when they start censoring people at the behest of the government. I mean, it's really the end of their protection because they're effectively government entities. And in fact, the theory has always been that the massive computing capacity that they've needed to maintain these sites could only come from one place and not from the private sector.
Well, this seems like a crime, a very high level crime, because it's a violation of the Constitution. But it doesn't seem like these guys are going to go to jail. We're not going to see half of the Department of Justice and half of the guys running Facebook and Twitter and Google be perp walked into a courtroom anytime soon. They're probably going to get away with this stuff because the corporate media is in on it, and they're just not going to report it. So there's not going to be any public outcry. There's not going to be any pressure for any kind of indictment or any kind of really even a serious investigation, unless the Republicans take over most of the government, most or all of the government, and then they have an incentive to investigate this stuff. But until that happens, everybody's going to skate. I think it's an astounding thing. It's way more serious than most of the crimes that we're pointing to out there. But I think they're just going to walk.
I'm inclined to agree with you, and the proof will be when this kid, who I don't care if he went to MIT or not, he was not the mastermind here. There was somebody else. He's a figurehead. He's a dupe. That kid ain't that smart. He's just not that smart to pull this off. Hey, and we'll just have to see. if the Republicans are actually going to stand up. But in the meantime, maybe Elon Musk is the solution to all that ails big tech. If you've been watching the show coming out of Twitter, mass firings, mass layoffs, mass tweeting, mass trolling. Trump is back on the site, as well as a bunch of other people who've been kicked off of Twitter. And the left is having a meltdown over this.
Yeah, well, you never want to fall in love with a politician, a political philosophy, or a billionaire, right? Because they will break your heart. But so far, so good with Twitter. Elon Musk has made Twitter way more fun than it was. My feed just got vastly more interesting.
I noticed myself, and maybe it's self-fulfilling prophecy, but it seems like my tweets are getting more traction. I've always suspected that I was shadow banned on the site, which is why I never put much effort into it. But now I'm seeing, like, I send out a tweet, 25, 30 people will like it. I never had that before, but maybe it was the tweet. I said, what's more non-essential than a non-essential government employee? A non-essential Twitter work, right?
Well, that, yeah, good tweet. Actually, that is a really funny part of this process, because Elon Musk has literally fired or caused to quit half of the people running Twitter, and Twitter's still out there. It's indistinguishable from its previous incarnation.
Maybe more.
Seems the same. Yeah, it's actually more interesting than it was. So
yeah.
So yeah, it's completely possible that Twitter was really more of a social activism center, where people went just to have an impact on the world and weren't really required to do much work or anything. And now that it's going to be run at a profit or with the goal of profitability, we'll see a very different place there. And good, that's the way it should be. Yeah. And we always need more Uber drivers. So it's not like these Twitter guys are going to be out in the cold or anything. They're going to find gainful employment doing useful stuff that improves people's lives. So it's a win-win-win as far as I can see.
Hey, so what about the debut of the digital dollar? Is that going to matter? Is it going to succeed? What's going to happen with that?
Well, two more really bad things were announced this week. One is the U.S. is going to start field testing the central bank digital currency that they've been threatening us with for a long time. And basically, it'll be Fed bucks, whatever. It'll be an account with the Federal Reserve, where they sucker you in by automatically adding $500 to it or whatever that they just make out of thin air. And once you're in, and you're using that as your main checking and savings account, then they got you. They know everything you're doing, everywhere you're going. They can control the value and the amount of currency that's in that account. They can coerce you into buying what they say you should buy and speaking in ways that they say you should speak. It's a terrifying prospect. And we're actually taking steps to make it happen now. At the same time, the G20, which is a meeting of the biggest economies, just announced that they're all going to embrace vaccine passports for international travel now. So this whole COVID thing is looking like it was just a setup. It was like the trial run for what comes next. And they figured out how to do vaccine passports at scale. And they figured out that a large number of people will accept it. So now they're going to make it actual multinational government organization policy. So at some point, the next pandemic will come along, or some other crisis will happen, and they'll have this infrastructure set up so they can say, okay, from now on, you've got this electronic passport that you've got to show to people. It's going to have some of your medical records in it. It might be connected to your central bank digital currency account. We'll see, but they're building this technological totalitarian state right in front of us, piece by piece. And the time will come when they have the ability to put all the pieces together into one thing and use it to control people. So we're coming, it's coming. This is not science fiction. And it's not conspiracy theory anymore. It's actually being put into place at an accelerating rate.
Yeah, this is true. No question. Hey, so, and finally, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the housing bubble burst. There's like 3 times more inventory now than there was this time last year. Rates are over 7%, and everything, mortgage demand is like disappearing. What's going on?
The housing bubble has burst, like you said. This was a big, serious housing bubble, especially post-pandemic, because home prices spiked by another 25 or so percent during what should have been a brutal recession when the pandemic lockdowns were in full force. So check this stat out. To buy the median price house 2 years ago, you needed an income of about $60,000. With mortgage rates what they were back then. But at today's mortgage rates and today's prices, you need an income twice that high. You need 120 grand a year to buy the median price house. And in 2 years, affordability crashed that badly. So it's no surprise that we've got to retrace a lot of ground here before the housing market gets healthy. But in the meantime, people can't buy houses. They can't take out mortgages to buy houses that they want because they just can't afford a decent house now. So home sales are crashing. Inventory of homes for sale is spiking. It's back up to like 2008 levels. In other words, the major housing bust that we've seen in our lifetimes, we're replicating some of those statistics now. So I don't see how we stay out of a recession in the near term here, because housing is a big part of the economy, and it's crashing. And you combine that with tech layoffs and 3 or 4 of the other things. And the that chart I sent you that shows credit card debt at the highest level ever and the savings rate at the lowest level ever. So in other words, in the last couple of years, we've been putting our lives on plastic because we don't have any savings left. And that is also a sign of an impending recession, because when you get to the point where your credit card debt is immense and your savings are minuscule, you have to go through a period of really low spending. And that's what apparently the whole country is heading for. So, housing is crashing. Consumer debt cannot get any higher than this. So consumers have to pull way back. And I can't see us avoiding a recession in 2023, and maybe a brutal recession, because these are serious stats. And if the Fed is not going to pivot on a dime and go back to easing right away, then this stuff gets to play out, which is unusual. For the past 30 or 40 years, we never let the really bad imbalances play out. We always tried to short circuit them with easy money. Now we might not do that. So who knows?
Well, that's why nobody believed that the Fed wasn't going to pivot up to now, including me. But here we are. They haven't pivoted. So is this their intent, to drive the country into the world into a major global depression? Even if it's not their intent, they might wind up doing it.
Well, that's the question. Are they morons or evil geniuses that we've been asking for all these years, for these decades? And it's kind of indistinguishable in some cases, because the policies that would be implemented by either group, a bunch of evil geniuses running the world or a bunch of total morons blundering off a financial cliff, they kind of look the same until you find out how they respond to it. So if they respond with by flipping the switch on that totalitarian state that we're talking about, then they were evil geniuses. Yeah. And if they're morons and they just blunder around for another 5 years trying one thing and another and none of it working, okay, well then they're morons. But either way, we have that crisis out there waiting to happen. And if they don't immediately start easing in, say, early 2023, then we're going to get the full-on 1930s treatment, where we have a deflationary implosion of a lot of major sectors of the global economy. And I think it's 50-50 chance that happens.
All right. Well, what's your opinion out there? Are they morons? Are they evil geniuses? Or are they both? Send us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com, or put your answer in the comment section on the YouTube channel. And make sure you go over to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free newsletter. You go to John's old site, dollarcollapse.com. Are you the editor emeritus there, John?
Yeah, I'm not contributing to dollarcollapse.com anymore. I'm a little bit of a figurehead still, but the new ownership is running it. They're doing a very good job. So definitely check back in. But I'm going to start a Substack feed here in December and then launch it behind its little paywall in January. Right. So I'll be back to publishing my own stuff pretty soon. I'll let you know when. And
maybe we'll put some of these talks up there too and see how they get received.
Definitely, I'm going to post all of our videos there, and it'll just be available to whoever wants to see it.
That's great. All right. Well, that's it for this week. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, John. Be well and take care.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.